Welcome to 10,000 Miles. Today's guest is Luc Dallaire. Luc is a guy I met through the business, a professional. And it's very rare that you meet somebody who works at an organization whose past, present, and probably future is tied so closely to the product and the value they do and the underpinnings of why they do it. Luc works for a company called Zenerate that delivers training, automation, and simulations. And you're going to hear a lot about how the brain works and how people learn and why repetition and creating a straight line of neural pathways for people is the fastest, best way, most effective way for people to learn. Luc has got a great family background. It's sort of in the blood, as they say. And I had an amazing time talking to him today. This is a topic I really love. As you know, I'm a lifelong learner. I love information. I like learning new things. And, hopefully while I take my last breath, hopefully 35, 40 years from now, I'm learning something as I'm doing it. But let's not wait another minute here. Let's dive in to Luc Dallaire. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Luc Dallaire, how are you?
I'm good, Vig, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. Brother Luc is in the house today, and we are getting ready to talk about some of my favorite subject matter. The human brain, learning, the
Yeah.
mind, and Luc is quite an impressive guy. I met Luc through business. He's laughing, or was that his wife laughing in the background? But
Yeah, it probably was a little bit of both.
yeah. I met Luc through business, but immediately knew there was more under the covers, in Luc's substance. He was a really astute, smart guy and in command of his subject matter in a way that seemed a lot more like more than business experience. It seemed like a passion and a study. And over the past couple of years, Luc, I've come to find that out to be true. So why don't you take a
Yeah.
minute, introduce yourself to people, and maybe let's set up some of that foundation about who Luc is.
Yeah. So my name is Luc Dallaire. Today I am the global sales leader of a company called Zenerate, which is sort of funny because it is very much in line, to your point, Vic, with the passion that I've had in this space. But it was a very long, 12, 13 or so year detour that I did. In the corporate world, I led, different functions. I led global strategy. I led a PMO and some analytics teams. I did a stint as an instructional designer, and then I found my way back to fundamentally a learning company, right? A learning simulation technology company. And I grew up in this space. My dad has studied and delivered as a performance consultant things about mental skills since way before I was born. So I was literally born and bred in this space. I studied it in school. I studied neuroscience and all the things how people learn and especially memory, which has been a fascination of mine. And so now I get to actually use that, which is really no other place I could use that except for a company called Zenerate. So it's pretty
It's
cool. It's been
incredible.
really fun.
Luc, it's amazing what you pick up at the dinner table growing up.
It's true.
And
And
you
it
were,
was dinner table, the sports arenas, the
yeah.
car rides, the everything.
You're
It
very
was
fortunate.
it came
You're very
together.
fortunate. Both of my parents were in the insurance industry. So if you had a claim from an accident, I might have a little something for you that would have rubbed off from my experience. But
Yeah,
hey, thanks
that's
for
great.
coming on. Hey,
Yeah, you're
Luc,
welcome.
appreciate Luc goes around the country and maybe even outside of the country in the world. But I know, Luc, you have this presentation that you go around giving that really talks about the science of how people learn and how companies should be thinking about training people versus the ways we've traditionally done it. And when I say traditionally done it, I mean, up until recently, I will tell you, it's been 30 plus years since I've watched people get trained coming into organizations. And, we went from Word Perfect to Word and from Word to PowerPoint, or if maybe a few Illustrator docs. A
Yeah,
couple of the tools have changed, the authoring tools and even the repositories for the content have changed, but the methods have not largely
correct.
changed.
Yeah.
And I will
That's
tell
the
you
whole
this
problem.
before and before I unleash you, I will say this. I don't think the results have changed much either.
You are spot on. Actually,
All right.
I think it was HBR that did a study a few years ago, and they interviewed over 1,500 business leaders, and they asked them a whole slew of questions. A lot of them related to learning, and how.
Okay.
If Vic, if you had to guess, what percent of business leaders are dissatisfied with their learning function? How many? What would you guess?
It's kind of a trick question. Intuitively, I'd want to say it's high, but then part of me says, well, maybe they don't yearn for anything more because it's been like this for my 3
Interesting.
decades.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna go with my initial intuition, and I'm gonna say it's higher than 90%.
It's higher than 90%. It's not
Okay.
quite 90%. It's
Okay.
75%. So you actually you went even more far across the field than most.
Okay.
What most people do is they say, yeah, it's probably 50-50, or even lower. What we
Okay.
typically see is this study showed that more than 75% of business leaders were not happy with their learning function.
Okay.
And it was primarily due to the fact that they couldn't prove that there was any impact actually happening to their P&L statements.
Wow. That's
To your
pretty
point around
incredible.
impacts haven't changed, that is correct. And there's research to prove it. And I think we'll probably get into it here in the next however long this is, but there's a lot of science behind why that actually is the case. And until recently, technologically limited reasons as well.
Amazing. Hey, do me a favor before we dive into the meat of the presentation that you give. I want to save 10 minutes and I want to use it right here. I want to hear more about what your dad did, how it rubbed off, and then what your journey was like to get to this point where you've got this passion for these topics.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So my dad he's a performance consultant. Actually, his studies were exercise physiology. So
Okay.
a lot of the body, less the mind, more the body. And so he created a program with a colleague of his that was a sports psychologist, where they created sort of a specialized program for high performance athletes. That's how they started their business. And it was, half mental skills, half physiology, et cetera. And as they went through that, they started seeing how much mental skills were really driving things like the power of imagery, how to get in the zone and understand what you feel like so you can be in the zone more, right? You've heard of the
Hey,
concept of the
love it.
zone, right?
Yep.
Think
Of
about
course.
race car drivers, right? If you're not in the zone, you might die. That's not an understatement, right? We've seen it uh, too often. So he's really shifted into that and has for decades talked about the power of the mind over matter, mental skills, the power of imagery, etc. I mean, I'd be on the free throw line shooting a free throw, and he's like, first you
Mm,
have to imagine yourself in your brain shooting it, and so you
yeah.
sort of predispose yourself to
Yeah.
making the ball, right? If you imagine yourself, or if you say, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, that's your brain
Yeah.
subconsciously. The mind doesn't think about not, right? So if you're picturing yourself missing, you're actually predisposing yourself to miss. You have to
I've
imagine
read
the right
somewhere,
things.
I'm sorry, I've
Yeah,
read
yeah,
somewhere
go
that
ahead.
the brain actually doesn't know the difference between you imagining it and the actual doing of it. Is that true?
Yeah, so because if your imagery is powerful enough, it is like a movie. It's like a video, and so
Okay.
there's a ton of research. There's a really cool study with piano players on this topic, where if you can imagine something to the correct amount of lifelikeness, you can actually still build skill or get better at something, or predispose yourself because the imagination still triggers the same neural pathways just as it would to do the real thing, right? It's
Brain
just
is an amazing
fascinating. So
thing.
that's what really got
Fascinating.
me interested in this stuff.
Okay.
So, I was sort of bred to take over the family consulting firm. And so I went to school, I studied psychology, I got deep into neuroscience and memory and those types of things. And then I met my wife my last semester in school. Wasn't my wife then, but
Okay.
became my wife. And I decided to sort of change direction. I was like, I don't know that I want to travel in the same way that my dad used
Hmm.
to do and that sort of thing. So I just got a job at a call center.
Okay.
And I was like, I'll figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And then I was like, wow, this is an interesting place. And I just started being like, hey, did you know that this is a challenge that you have here? Have you ever thought about fixing it like this? And so I
Right.
sort of had a knack for process improvement and those types of things. And a lot of it was centered around I didn't know it at the time, I don't think, Vic, but it was a lot of it was psychology based, right? Think about de-escalations in a call center environment. There's a lot of psychology and phrasing strategy and things like that that takes to be good at that.
Yeah.
So I just continue to go through that. It's always been a passion of mine because I'm a pretty competitive guy. So, I think about what I learned growing up and I think about how it drove me to, position myself for success maybe more than if I hadn't thought about those things. And so in every facet of my career that I've grown into, it's really been probably more impactful than I even give it credit for.
Neat.
Managing complex projects, right? There's a lot of interpersonal dynamics to figure out how to
Oh,
manage.
yeah.
You don't understand necessarily how personality psychology is and things like that. You might not have the same success. So it's always been central to how I've lived my life and thinking about, you have as much control of your destiny as you can conjure in that regard. And then, I happened to meet I started a consulting business sort of after hours on the side in a former life. And I met, a guy who founded a company called Bright. His name was Rob. And he was building a simulation company, a company that used simulations to give practice at scale to people. And I was like,
Yeah.
you can do half of what you say you can do. I'm in. So I was fortunate enough. He sort of, let me participate in different capacities. I ultimately joined Bright as head of growth after we raised the seed. And then 2 years later, actually almost to the day, I think it was 2 years, one day, officially was when the merger between Bright and Zenerate happened. So then, Zenerate was the original AI coach. We'll talk,
Yeah.
I'm sure, more about that. But that concept of simulations and the visions we all had came together, and that's what brought me here today. So it's really cool to see technology that can enable the neuroscience that actually drives people to get good at stuff in a way that, to your point, for the last 30 plus years, we haven't had.
No, we haven't. Well, let's dive into this presentation.
Let's do it.
The first slide of your presentation is called a business mandate to change. When you open up this presentation, that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
business mandate to change. Tell me about that.
If you think about the numbers, right, and you think about as we go through the science, you'll come back to this and be like, oh, duh. Um, but think about learning is $100 billion+ a year industry.
Okay.
And when we think about the concept of scrap learning, which is, you're spending time in a classroom or in modalities that are much less impactful than maybe they could be. We call that scrap learning, right? You spend a lot of time doing it, you don't really learn anything from it. How much wasted time and money is spent in those modalities? And it is important to say that, historically, there hasn't really been a way to deliver learning in the way that is most optimal without technology to enable it, because there's a
Mm-hmm.
scalability component that's been
Yep.
fundamentally missing, which is why it hasn't changed in decades and decades until the last few years when companies like Zenerate would put these things together. Um, if you think that 50% of time spent training is wasted money and time, that's $50 billion
It's a lot.
of wasted money. There's your business mandate. How much of
Look
that
what's
can
in.
you recapture and put back into other fruitful things as a business if you're thinking about it from that lens?
Yeah. You've spawned some thought here that I don't think we've ever really thought. Well, I haven't thought about until this moment. I go back to thinking about my dad, who was also a pretty much a good learner. He liked learning new things, not about himself, but about stuff. Right? He
Yeah.
was a weekend warrior mechanic. He was a good one, and he knew a lot about cars. And everything he needed to do came from these fat manuals. If you ever worked on cars with your dad when you were a kid, you had the Chilton's manual.
Oh man.
And these were like the essential encyclopedias of a particular make and model. It wasn't all makes and models. You bought the Chilton's manual for the 71 Plymouth Satellite. You had the Chilton's manual for the 78 Ford Granada. Whatever car you had, there was a big fat book, and it dissected every single thing about that car. And so if you wanted to know how to disassemble something and reassemble it and how something worked and fixed it,
Yeah.
you grab the Chilton's manual. And my dad always had a Chilton's manual for the cars he owned. And if there was a problem, do this book, you figure it out. Oh, yep, that's how that comes out. And there were incredible pictorial pictures of how these things and illustrations of how all these things came apart. That was the way. Then comes YouTube,
Yeah.
and
That's how I learned how to play guitar. It's YouTube.
everything you want to know about how to build something, how to fix something, and I mean specific stuff,
Yeah.
right? There's somebody who took it upon themselves, either in a poorly lit, a well lit, a crappy camera, an amazing production, in some way, shape, or form, said, you take these 3 bolts out first, and don't forget those one way up in the back here. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know about that one, you're going to rip the dash apart. Then you pull it out and you get to here, and this is how it's done. I mean, that I would say was a tremendous change because people went from instructional learning to visual learning, and they can see, but that stuff didn't make it to corporate America.
Nope.
Not largely. Like, I haven't been a part or seen an organization that has YouTube videos en masse.
Yeah.
That some have some, and there are some explainer videos, and now we got all the AI people going through all this
E-learning.
stuff.
Yeah.
But
E-learning is the
but
version of that.
e-learning stuff.
Yep.
But not like that. So that was a game change. That was taken on for the people, by the people, I call it.
Yep.
And so let's go through some of these stats here about what companies spend. So we got 50% potentially wasted, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the hypothesis, right? Like that's our, when
Okay.
we went through that and we looked at this, like we see people cut their training time in half when they think about it through new the new technology that can enable a new operating model, right? A
Yeah.
new delivery model that can be restructured to become more efficient. If we see people cut their training time in half, right? That's not, plus or minus, then that means
Yep.
roughly half of your spend could be saved, fixed, repurposed, reallocated.
It's a lot of
And
money.
so that's a ton of money.
So talk to me about, where we go from here. 30 to 40% of traditional training gets applied. E-learning, webinars, shadowing. So you're basically saying that a small percentage of the training is useful. Is that essentially what you're saying there?
Yes, I think the core of all of this is that we actually stop before we get to the actual learning. So
Okay.
there's the model, and I don't know if this is if you remember seeing this, but the learn, see, do are
Learn,
like
see, do.
version of
Yeah.
that. There's a million different ways to say that. I've had people say, "Oh, we say, tell me, show me, let me try." Whatever
Mm-hmm.
version of that you have. You do have to learn something, right? The learning condition goes that you have to get introduced to a topic and knowledge something. That's where your YouTube videos become super
Mm-hmm.
valuable. That's where your e-learnings of today, or even your classroom-based settings, if you're thinking about corporate training in this sense, that's a really good way to learn, right? It could be asynchronous, it could be digital, it could be in
Yep.
live in person. But then you need to see it in context, right? So the concept of shadowing has been around for forever. If you think about it in these call center settings as an example, you used to go out onto the floor next to Johnny, you double jack into his earphones and you just sit there and
Yep.
listen, right? That's now, I don't even know how you do it virtually with Teams and other things. I think it's painful. That is the version of let me see it in action, where I'm now trying to incorporate what I've just learned into context. That's the middle piece. And then you have to do it. So then usually you switch gears, where now Johnny's listening side saddle and he's going to help you out if you need help. And now I'm driving. That's the traditional way to do this approach.
Okay.
The challenge with that is it's not scalable, and you get very, very little actual practice, and you really lose the concept of increments of increasing complexity. And I can dive into all that stuff, when we're ready. When you think about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve and why and how people remember things.
Yeah. Let's
We,
open that up.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is basically a concept that you guys have probably, anybody who's watching this has probably seen this sort of exponentially reducing. I don't know where the camera is this way, where it starts out high, and in the first hour you might have forgotten 40 to 50% of what you just heard, and by the next day you're down to 20 to 30%.
Huh.
The important key on that though is you don't generally remember things unless there is a specific attempt to actively contemplate or think about that information. right? And I read this fact, I think when I was putting this presentation together originally, your brain takes in 11 million bits of information a second through your
A
senses,
second.
through all your senses. Think about everything you can possibly take in: smells, sights, sounds, everything, which is ridiculous. But your brain can actually only really do anything with 50. So
What's
the
it do with the
concept
other
of,
bits?
well, so you're working, everybody sort of knows short term versus long term. It's actually called working memory, and then your long term memory. Your
Okay.
working memory is where everything goes into. And then your brain has to then go, okay, what do I care about and what do I not care about, right? Danger, excitement, things that are important of value, right? That's what starts to become those 50 that get sort of thought about or moved into your long-term memory. What we do, if you take this now back to the learning paradigm of today, or of the last 30 years that you described before, Vic, I might sit in a classroom for 6 weeks going through all this stuff, and then I shadow, and then I do this nesting sort of just light practice experience. The
Yep.
problem with that, going back to your question about shadowing, is I've spent 6 weeks learning all this stuff, but because I haven't done anything with it while I've been learning it, it's mostly forgotten. So by the time I'm shadowing, I'm like, I don't actually remember any of this.
Hmm.
And then by the time I'm actually trying to do the job, or practice the skill, or remember even the information, I'm like, I don't remember any of this because that was so long ago and it wasn't important enough for me to contemplate. So I forgot about it. That's what your brain does. Your brain filters constantly what's important, what's not. And there's way more information that's not important that will constantly be there. So the change to that is doing increments where you're learning something, then you're immediately doing something with it. And then you learn the next thing, and then you do something with it, etc. That concept of increasing complexity and piecing pieces together actually allows you to chunk out things where you actually remember and learn and think about it. And it's just a different delivery mechanism of learning that actually leverages how people's brains work to store information. And then you get to the difference of knowledge versus skill, which are two very different things as well.
It's pretty incredible. Um, Clearly, behind me, because of all the guitars up, I'm a music guy. I've studied music. What you don't know about me, I was a martial arts guy. Studied martial arts as a younger guy. And what you're really describing to me, and aside from the practice of trying to acquire those skills myself, I always liked to understand how the masters got to where they got to. And those stories are identical to what you're describing. The ancient philosophy around martial arts was never give the students the whole basket on the first day.
Mm-hmm.
They got an apple a day, and
That's
they
right.
ate the apple slowly so they had time to digest it, work through the system, and the next day they came back for another apple. So
Yep.
it was the metaphor there, right? And in music, there are and same with martial arts, but in music, there are so many things that go into becoming great at music. I had a friend who used to go to Germany every year for about 8 years to study with this master classical guitarist. And he said the first day, he said he would sit there after practicing for 11 months, all the stuff that Hubert gave him. He'd come back and Hubert would stare at him and look from all angles and look and listen and look. And then he would take his hand and he'd move it like this
A half
much,
inch. Yeah, exactly.
if that, like an eighth of an inch, and
Your
go play
wrist
now,
just has to do
play
this,
now,
right?
play now,
Exactly.
right? The most minute, but that changed his angle of attack on the strings.
Yep.
It
Yep.
changed the comfort and the level in his wrist, and it changed the tone of the instrument, which had this knock-on effect to everything else he did.
Yep.
But and after a while, he didn't have to think about this. And so once he didn't have to think about this, the rest, that brain opened up for other things. But so what you're really describing has been around for thousands of years.
It is intuitive in everything except for corporate training,
Corporate
right? I mean,
training.
I've always talked about the simplest way: piano. You first learn your right hand, and then you
Yeah.
learn your left hand, and
Yep.
then you start to figure out how to put them together. Or like if in
Yes.
classical, especially, right, you're finger
Yeah.
picking these incredible patterns, and you have to do it a million times to get good at it, so that you don't have
Yep.
to think about it while you're then figuring out these complex chords on this side. You don't just
Exactly.
do it; you learn that concept. To your point, has been around in every medium
Discipline.
discipline.
Anything
Is a
that
great,
required
yeah.
discipline. Yeah.
But corporate training is a lot like the Industrial Revolution. I got groups of people I got to get in and get out and get through. And because practice is not scalable typically, sorry, that's not fair to say. Practice can be scalable. Practice without coaching is not
Yeah.
scalable, right? You have
Yeah.
to
Right.
figure out how to coach at scale to really make practice worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those things have not been scalable, and so we've been stuck in this dinosaur of a paradigm where now we've got the ability to deliver practice and coaching at scale throughout other types of experiences that leverage, finally allow us to think differently about this, to get out of those old ways and incorporate some of the things that are so intuitive.
Yeah.
People around how you build skill and how you build memory and knowledge, um, in a way that can actually be both beneficial to the person learning and to, in this case, the business, right? There's actually value across all angles
You
in
know,
this
there
really
are
unique
there
thing.
are a few companies out there that are so big that still look at the training practices, and they're willing to make these multi-year investments in individuals before the rubber even hits the road. Two examples is I had a friend who worked for Ross Perot at
Mhm.
EDS for years, who basically had all the manuals and playbooks back from when he came up, worked there for 30 something years. And the amount of training they received was unparalleled for the time. And then I have a friend here in town whose son, a few years back, became a new add to the IBM staff. And he wasn't aligned to see a customer for 2 years. Came in, they had a 2-year training program. So he would learn how to drink the big blue. He would learn all about the products and services. He would learn about the value propositions. And he was given raises and incentives along the way for achieving a level of learning about the
Learning
company and
milestones.
its
Yeah.
processes. And he finally got cut loose, not cut loose, fired, but cut loose
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
engage with customers,
Opened up
right?
the
And,
cage. Here you go.
and yeah, they opened the cage. And that's an incredibly rare circumstance. Most people have a 3 to 6 week training program. They get nested, especially in call centers, because it's expensive to train, but it's expensive to lose as well. So I guess you have to
Yes,
decide where you want to lose your money, where you want to spend your money.
it is. And actually the I think the misconception or the naivete, if you will, is that because of going back to some of those stats earlier where there's really, there's very rare to see any value tied to the learning function. Well, then
Okay.
why would I invest in that? Right. So I invest less and less and less in that. And I do the bare bones minimum. And without realizing that there's another way to do it that actually gets you significant value as a business and to the learner. And so there's a return actually to a business on this type of investment because it makes incredible impact, right? If you are a big company and you hire 5,000 people a year, every
Yep.
day you reduce their training will save you hard dollars. Every day you make them faster will get you burning through. If I'm calling on, leads, right? Sales leads, I might actually convert those leads where when I had no idea what I was doing, I get these nice list of leads and I burn through them and I don't know how to convert them. So I lose them all. Everybody loses in that scenario. The person feels anxious. There's a whole anxiety in this paradigm of how the actual brain works is fascinating, but we literally do the opposite of what we should be doing.
Hmm.
But the misconception is that we don't think about it that way. We're like, we can't tie value, so we're not going to invest in it. And then it just becomes, this redheaded stepchild of an organization, whereas it could be, and in a lot of times when people do it correctly, becomes one of the most valuable portions and functions in a business because of how much impact it starts to drive to their employee base and their business, but also the customers and the members and the patients that they serve, which is ultimately the goal of any business is to support the customers or patients that they do the most effectively. You actually can do that primarily through driving the teams that you put out there into the field to be the best they can be.
I know with the joined forces of Zenerate and Bright that you have a comprehensive set of tools for
Mhm.
learning, training, repetition. But without sort of talking about those tools specifically,
Yeah.
can you walk me through sort of the philosophies and mindset and break down the training tactics that I think they ultimately get deployed with these tools, but
Yeah.
I think understanding the why behind it would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, so I think the few concepts we just shared really tie back to this. So think about
Yeah.
the learn, see, do model
Yeah.
as a function of the, supporting the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve concept of
Okay.
trying to remember this. So think about um, I'll paint two pictures. I'll paint the picture of I think what happens today. Well, so I used to design this training 15 years ago, so I know what happens
Okay.
today.
Okay.
And then what it could look like, regardless of which
Okay.
tool you use, right? So
Okay.
today, with the concept of we got 6 weeks in a classroom.
Yep.
Maybe there's a mix of e-learnings and things like that, but fundamentally, you're getting this learn portion. You're getting lots of this. There might be quizzes baked in there that are supposed to test knowledge and things like that. But fundamentally, I have 6 weeks of this. I have a week that I spend shadowing my peers out in the field, and then I have 2 or 3 weeks where I'm now in this usually it's called nesting motion, which is I'm talking to real customers of my company. And I've got maybe some hypercare around me, some team leads, some supervisors, some trainers who might be there to answer questions. That's what happens today.
Hmm.
Well, I'm going to pivot for a second because this really helps, I think, to visualize this. So walk through an exercise with me, if you will, Vic. So imagine you can close your eyes, you can keep them open, doesn't really matter. Imagine a
Hmm.
field, a big giant field of 4 foot tall grass, as far as the eye can see, completely untouched, sweeping in the breeze. You're at the front of it in a Jeep, and your job is to get to a specific point on the other side of the field. So what do you do the first time around? You drive just wherever you can go. You get there and you go, oh, I should have been over there. Okay, now I know I need to go to the left. So you loop back around, you start at the beginning again, and you're like, I have this little tiny path I can barely see of bent grass. I'm going to go down that path, and at some point, I'm going to choose to veer off to the left because I know I need to get down there. Right? I get to the end, and I'm still not quite there yet, and you keep doing that till you find the path, and then you drive that path over and over again until it becomes a dirt road. It becomes a single lane road. It's paved. Now it's a highway. Right? That is actually what happens in your brain when you practice something. Your brain has
Okay.
no pathway when you're trying to learn something new. You first create a pathway, and it's wrong, probably, right? That's the whole point of practice, is it's not right. And then you continue to refine that neural pathway until you get the perfect pathway, and then you strengthen it through practice, right? You now go over it a bunch of times. Well, when I'm a new hire in this example, I'll keep using this example because it fits well. Phase number one is I get to this open field. The first time I'm practicing is with a real customer on the phone or in person or whatever your job is, or with a real, I'm processing a claim. Now I've got to make a decision on somebody's life based off of this, right?
Yeah.
But because it's now a real setting, I've got a muddy windshield and flat tires because anxiety makes it even more difficult for me to navigate any sort of environment.
Yeah.
Remember?
Uncertainty kicks in. Yeah.
That's right. So that's where that's where somebody in phase A starts when they practice. Now, the different way to think about that could be I have this digital first. It can be digital, it can be hybrid, right? We like hybrid programs a lot. Actually, there's a lot of value in that thing. But the concept is take those 6 weeks and then the concept of practice and pull practice forward, maybe onto day 2 and 3, where you're saying, here's concept number 1, practice concept number 1. Here's concept number 2, practice concepts number 1 and 2. Here's concept number 3, practice 1, 2, and 3. Right? I'm to your point about the apple. I love that analogy, right? I'm slowly giving you something new, but
Yeah.
I'm making you practice and review that learning, that neural pathway, that Jeep analogy. I'm continuing to strengthen the right paths, and then I'm adding the
Yeah.
last little bit that you don't know yet. And so now you're having less and less to navigate. Well, by the time that person's ready to talk to a real customer, they're sitting in front of this field that's been fully paved in the exact right direction with crystal clear windows and nice clean tires because they're fully confident and competent in what they're doing because they've done it so much that they're good. Who's going to be better at their job? Who's going to support that person, that customer better? And who's going to probably stick around? That second
Yeah. The
person.
person's more competent and more confident.
That concept, right? It's breaking it apart regardless of the tools, but it does center around delivering practice and coaching at scale. Because
Yeah.
without that, you can't
Important.
really break it apart. You have to be able to say, now do it. Well, that I can't really do role plays or fake, maybe I don't even have the ability to have fake claims to process because there's no way to deliver those things or fake buyers to sell to, or whatever, right? Maybe I don't have a satellite dish in front of me to figure out how to install it properly. But when you create a digital learning journey that can maybe put that person in the scenario to make a decision or to do a skill, even to use a software system, and then you say, now do it a bunch of times, then keep going. It does
Hmm.
require you to have a way to simulate in a safe environment and reduce that
Yeah.
anxiety, right? And it does require you to have coaching that says, hey, you did this well, now try, but you missed these marks. Here are the things for you to work on in your next attempt. I can't sit next to the learner one-on-one and do that, right? I need to be able to train maybe thousands of people without having hundreds of trainers side by side with them, because it's incredibly expensive to do that. Those have been the two missing pieces that the new tech of today can deliver.
Two pieces I want to comment on. One is in your tall field and grass scenario. There's a
It's
scenario that
the
actually
lane.
happens
Yeah.
that's even worse than you described. And then I want to come back to and talk about the minor tweaks. We'll use the hand of an eighth of an inch. What I've seen really happen, and it's just incredible to observe because, me spending decades in technology and I made it a practice of myself to go out to the field to see how my systems and the processes that the business put together really worked.
Yeah.
How could we fix anything? How could we? And boy, let me tell you, people's minds are creative. Even with the standard operating procedure and the way a system worked, somehow either the training or lack thereof gave people different moves to get to
Hmm.
the end. They didn't adopt the same path. So in your tall field, they drove, they kept going, and
Yeah.
they
You got
started
all these
going
different
right.
paths to get to the right
And they
place.
went back. They didn't loop back around. They went back halfway and they did 3 circles in a figure 8 and they finally got there. And that became the pathway.
Yeah.
I go all the way to the right. I back up. I do 3 circles in a figure 8 and then I get to the
Yeah.
end. Look, I got the outcome.
Yeah.
So what you're describing really is going down the right path from get-go,
Optimizing it. Yeah, that's right.
optimizing. And so when you talk about, the science behind burning in your neural pathways and the incremental learning, um, it makes a lot of sense as to why with this deliberate and automated and simulated capability that you could really heighten the training because they don't get very wide guardrails. They stay in the lanes which have been designed to promote the best results and the best outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important for two reasons. One is exactly the way you just mentioned, right? You want to give them the most efficient path, right? There may be 5 different ways to get to the same solution, but ideally most of us want to give their most efficient path. But the other
Yeah.
thing is also this. There is not an infinite amount of time to train somebody in any
Yep.
situation. You're
Nope.
generally trying to reduce it, change it, pack in more of what you need to. So if I was to say, hey, here's all the 5 ways to do all the things you want to do, I've now reduced the amount of focus on any given thing incredibly so, right? I've gone a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yep.
Whereas if I pick the best paths and I say, while there may be other ways to do it, this is our best practice. Now I can
Yep.
go deeper in that best practice and actually become good at it. So I could become good at the 80% of the 20% of transactions that drive 80% of any sort of volume, versus becoming good at literally none of the things that work when you try to spread it too thin and show everybody how to do
Mm.
everything. And that concept of
Yeah.
focus and prioritization is also super important for people to think about. How often do
Yeah.
you hear, I have such a complex business, I need them to know how to do a million things? Well, that might be true, but how many of those things are the lowest hanging fruit or the most high volume drivers of whatever the thing is that they're doing? Wouldn't it make sense to take the same amount of time to get deep with those so that they're incredibly good and proficient, and then to fold in through incremental ongoing upskilling these oddball solutions or these less common scenarios that you might encounter?
In the history of automobile making, well, I take it back. In the modern history of
Honestly, that's
automobile
a bold
making,
statement.
let's say from the invention of the production line forward, when we started doing things in mass, there hasn't been an individual who welded a frame, who put in the windshield, who screwed in the headlights, who rolled the car off the production line. Because in order to do this thing with a level of precision, first, and a level of predictability, second, and expediency, you had to get amazingly good at the thing you did.
Hmm.
I saw this actually emerge in the mortgage business through Quicken Loans. And I'm going to come back to that for a second. Um, I said the other piece we were talking about was that 1 millimeter, that little
Yeah.
tweak. You get people down this lane, and people, if you said to people, "Hey, there's a track. It's an oval. It's a quarter mile. Go run around the track." Most people can get on that track, pick a lane, and run around it with little to no instruction, right?
Yep.
And if you have a reasonable amount of fitness, maybe you can get around it a few times, and you're in good shape, right?
Yeah.
I had my days when I did my many, many, many laps. Okay, I'd like to make one right now, but um, now if you want to get around that lap 4 times, sub 4 minutes, there's conditioning, there's equipment, there's running strategy, and sometimes those tweaks to get from a 4:02 to a 3:59, it's going to be that micrometer
Micro.
measurement of
Yep.
something you do. And so the difference between average and greatness is not in the big stuff.
That's right.
If you want to, let's say above average and greatness. If you want to be elite, it's these micro changes that happens. And that's very hard to do. But athletes have the one thing that most amateurs don't have is they have constant feedback.
Yep.
Constant feedback. And what you're talking about through this exercise is this constant feedback. My nephew took golf lessons with Cameron McCormick here in Dallas, who's Jordan Spieth's coach.
Hmm.
And the thing that was cool about Cameron is Cameron would say, "Jack, first thing, the thing you need to be able to be successful at this game during your practice is you need the right reps and you need feedback. And
Yep.
then on top of that, you need to be able to self-diagnose that feedback to know what's happening to make the correction."
Yeah.
And now with modern technology, with launch monitors, and you can see the club angle and the speed and the ball speed and the spin and all that.
There's
All
more
of those
feedback than
things
ever.
tell
Yeah.
you, yeah, they all tell you what's happening at impact and the club path and all of that. And those things can be corrected. So his big thing was feedback, because you could swing a million times. You might wind up putting a game together with a swing that looks like Jim Furyk, but there's a reason there's one Jim Furyk,
Yeah.
right? And why there's not, most golfers swings. You've got a few outliers, you've got, the Wolfman, you've got John Rahm,
Yep.
you've got Furyk, you
Charles
got
Barkley.
Bryson with that tall, right? Although Barkley's much better now, but we're talking about edge. Most golfers who play at a very high level,
It's a carbon copy
they're,
swing.
they are burning the same fundamentals. So
Yep.
it's a pretty interesting process to get there. So let's go from there. We go past learn, see, do. Now where do we head?
I mean that. So, um, where do we head? We can head in a million directions. Learn, see, do is foundationally the operating model.
Yeah,
If you think about taking that chunk of learning on the front end, right, in
yeah,
scenario one, and chunking that out into focused, sequenced learning journeys using something like Learn, See, Do,
yeah.
you that is really truly the thing that makes the difference. And so
And
I guess the next piece is, yeah, go ahead.
you're talking about prioritizing, the high frequency slash high value,
Yes,
right?
correct. So think about, you once you figure out the operating model, then you do start thinking about the focus of the program, right? What are the things that drive the most value, to your point,
Mm-hmm,
prioritizing and focusing the elements of the program, or of the upskilling, whatever you need them to learn, to
mm-hmm.
capture the most impact with the least amount of time.
Yeah,
Um, now it becomes a little bit more of ongoing experience. So if as I design the operating model differently, that also changes a lot of paradigms. Because if you think about a function and how it operates today, and a learning and development function, it is classes, cohorts, they cram
mm-hmm.
through a schedule and they go. That is not personalized in just about any way, right? We're talking about a personalized experience where maybe somebody might learn faster than somebody else. And
Yep.
just because it takes you a little bit longer doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that's what you do. You know what? What's really interesting is this concept of. Have you heard the concept of learning styles?
No, I haven't.
So I'm glad you haven't. So there was, I don't know, in the 90s, maybe even the 2000s, learning styles were all the rage. I'm a writing learning style. I'm a visual learner. I'm an auditory learner. I'm a
Oh
tactile,
yeah, I've heard of
right?
those. I never
Yeah.
heard it quite put that way, but
So
I've
it
even
was
used
around
it.
the
I'm a
concept of
visual
people
learner.
learn differently. And then there was a tremendous amount of research that came out that said this is all nonsense because it's actually not.
Really?
People learn through what I just described. They learn through doing something. You can watch somebody do something a million times, but that does not mean that your body can then. So there's a difference between knowledge
Interesting.
and skill, right? So if I watched, like, I think we said this, if I watched Tender Surrender by Steve Vai, I've watched it a million times in my life. Probably I've watched him do
Okay.
it with that little that rosewood guitar, the head with the
Okay.
little monkey grip handle. I love that guitar.
Okay.
I know it. I can do it in my head. I will
Okay.
never in a million years be able to pick up my guitar and actually replicate it, because it's a difference between knowing that and then taking it in, putting it into practical application. And so whether you, now some people are, they might have a preference to when I can be introduced to something and get it through visual, auditory, etc. You have to ultimately do it. That's the core reason. So when you're changing the way that you push people through these programs, you do have to change the way the operating model goes, and then you have to change the way you think about learning. Because most people are think about learning through, did they complete the course? Did they finish the training? Did they
Mm,
pass their quizzes? That doesn't tell me at all if Vic can go have the conversation with so and so around product A, or actually process a transaction. I
yeah.
want to know, is Vic good at the skills that Vic should have learned throughout training?
Yeah.
And so that concept of certifying somebody through skill proficiency,
Yeah.
demonstrable skill proficiency versus passing a quiz, those things are incredibly different things to think about too, which also then changes how you assess people, how you think about training measurement. One of the things that is most counterintuitive to most learning professionals is, whenever, if you think about any quiz you ever took, especially in the corporate world, compliance training, right? Maybe you
Yeah.
fail it on accident. On accident, right? You don't need to, but you fail it.
Me?
Is there like
Moi?
a pang of
Yeah.
guilt, right? Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I can't believe I failed that. And then you get
They're gonna
shame,
know.
shame, you're failed. That
Yeah.
concept is so counterintuitive because the whole point of learning is that you practice, you fail, you learn, and you grow. So practice is, I didn't do it the right time the first time I did it. No problem. You have to do it enough times to get good at it. So even the concept of, it can take you 3, 4, 5, 10 times in a simulation or in an experience to get good at it, and that's totally fine. Even learners are predisposed to feeling bad or guilty for failing a quiz, or in this case, for failing practice. The whole point of practice is to make you good. It's not to
Yeah.
judge you with how long it takes you to get good necessarily, right? Even
Right.
that is a giant paradigm shift against the status quo today.
That's interesting. That is a different mind. It's, I'm thinking deeply while you're talking about all of these places where that's alive, and some good for conversation here and others not because they're controversial.
Yeah.
But but so many people are awarded credentials and positions based upon the test. My dad used to say something. My dad was a guy from New York, very, very smart guy, but they used a term there called street smarts.
Hmm. Yeah.
And what street smarts really meant was, not that you were rough and tumbles. It's that you're doing the work,
Yep.
right? You're out there, you have an intuition about you. My dad didn't go to school to become a mechanic, in his spare time, but he did the work. Like he knew what he was doing around cars.
Yeah.
Same thing with air conditioning and refrigeration. And my dad was a blue collar guy in a white collar job who did blue collar jobs on the side. But all of that came through small increments, repetition, and
Yeah.
it's maybe a good transition. We talked a little bit about the high value, high proficiency, and we talked enough about the building blocks, but is there some mathematical equation to how much you should give somebody on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Yeah.
Or is that individual as well?
I think it's variable, but before I forget, I'm going to come back to this question real quick, Vic. But
Okay.
what you just said sparked me a question that I think is one of the most. It's such a microcosm of this concept. There's two planes. One pilot has 10,000 hours of watching flight videos, and
Hmm.
one pilot has 1,000 hours of flight time. Whose
Hmm.
plane would you rather get into?
I probably would want to get into the plane with a guy who's actually flown it.
Yet we send millions of people out to support individual, and these are nurses and doctors and salespeople who are working. They're customer service representatives hitting, challenging. My mother just died. How do I make sure that their insurance is all good? Those kinds of things. We trot everybody out in the 10,000 hours of video time
Yeah.
and not in the other time, and yet and we're curious why results fall flat. That concept is the biggest change in the way that we need to think about delivering learning. Now that there is tech out there that can deliver that 1,000 hours of flight time in an optimal, in an efficient, in an effective way. I think that's the key: is effective and efficient. And there's actually benefits to all those things.
Do
Uh,
you ever see the movie Borat?
I did.
The Borat movie? It reminds me of a scene in the Borat movie, and I'll adjust the scene to fit the scenario. To give a person a job with a customer from a little training is like to give a monkey a gun. Very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting, and some things are mild in their
Yeah.
level of risk, and some things are incredibly risky, right? You
Yeah.
might be going through disputes. You might be going through, right? If I'm processing a claim, if I say no, somebody's life might be permanently impacted versus if I say yes, right? Things like that. And if I
Yeah.
don't think about it or do it properly, I might screw that up. And so there are some places where there is a significant amount of risk or impact or consequence as a result of a quality mishap or failure. So, um,
You have to
anyway,
align the skill and the level of training to the task.
yeah,
It's certainly unfair. Let's use the mortgage business, a client you and I are talking to right now.
yep,
And some of the questions that the contact center people receive are simple. Hey, did you receive my last payment?
yep,
Right? Can you send me my recent tax form if it's, January, February? Those things could probably be trained pretty simply: where to look for the payment, how to communicate it, where to look for the next payment due, et cetera. But if I have somebody who's come on a hardship,
hmm,
there are so many rules of the road around what I may or may not be able to do based upon the hardship, for a forbearance or
yeah,
something of that matter. Now,
yeah,
um, it requires more questions. It requires a level of empathy. It requires some other
critical
language
thinking,
to try
yeah,
critical thinking. And so, to take somebody from, let's say they come out of their 3 week to 4 week training program and they get put on a call, and the very first call they get is the most complex, can't make my payments for the next, few months problem. That's going to be a sticky spot. Right.
yep,
So, but maybe, and this is what hopefully companies are doing, the nesting period is adjusted to the cues and the
yeah,
types of calls they
yeah,
may take. Right.
yeah, and to that point, and maybe going back to the question you asked me a second ago around um, the is there a mathematical equation, right,
Right.
to do this?
Yeah.
Look, I would say no and yes, maybe not to the individual, but generally what we have found, I think we have this in a white paper somewhere, is think about a pie chart, right, where today 70% or 75% of that is e-learnings. There's 10% shadowing, and then there's like this tiny sliver of practice, right?
Yeah.
What we typically see the most successful hybrid programs have is at least 50% practice. At least
Okay.
half of your learning program should be hands-on, scalable practice and coaching. You do
Okay.
need to have some of the learn, right? Some of the classroom-based time or digital lessons or whatever to introduce a topic, some of the contextualization that shadowing brings. You can shadow, you can record uh, the things you would like people to see and actually digitize shadowing too. And there's a ton of efficiencies, right? We could go into so many strategies with how to continue to make that more efficient. But I think the most important thing would be at least half of your program being practice, because what happens when you do that is the pie, which is representing time, shrinks, right? You need less time to get somebody the same level of goodness than
Yeah.
you would otherwise with the traditional methods when you really think about changing the operating model a little bit and then putting practice in there. Sometimes you can sprinkle it, some people are like, I'll just sprinkle a little bit of practice at the end of my training. Well, yes, that will help. Like any practice is better than none. But to really make improvements, you pull it forward and you increment and you chunk out that practice all the way through the program to take advantage of some of the stuff we've talked about so far today. That allows you to really get people way better, way faster. The speed to proficiency metric is a common metric that everyone struggles with. It takes me,
Mm.
you know, 8 weeks to train somebody and then takes them 6 months to get good at their job. Well, what if it took you, 5 weeks to train somebody and they're good at their job after that 5 weeks?
Yeah.
What
That
kind of
would be a
impact would
paradigm
that do to
shift.
your business and to your customers and to yourself? Because now I don't have these subpar or not yet good individuals supporting my customers that might be driving away business, that might be, churning things, that might be making quality mistakes or errors that have significant penalties on my side, right? Depending on what kind of industry you're in, there's regular, you might have penalties out the wazoo for messing things up or doing things incorrectly,
Totally.
a compliance statement, just little things like that. There's so much at stake for businesses that, when we talk to somebody and we tell them a little bit about what we do and we show them examples of impacts we've seen and stuff like that, it is a no-brainer to everybody because most people don't even know that this is possible anymore. I think that's the thing that's really key is all of the old thinking that 30 years of lack of change. It's because there hasn't been a better way to do it, really.
Yeah.
And now that there is, people need, as they learn about it, they need to learn now how to undo a lot of those old ways of thinking to then take advantage of some of the stuff we just talked about. That change management piece is really, really challenging. Or
You
is,
just
is
you
one of the
just
bigger challenges that goes unbroken down, right? People don't think about it
yeah.
as much. They're like, I'm just going to plop it in there. I'm like, you do, but then the people wielding the technology need to think differently. The leadership needs to think differently. The learners need to be told a little bit differently and managed differently to actually optimize what you're trying to do.
You just threw a softball up for me because you
You're
gave me the
welcome.
beautiful lead into the next question, dovetailed in. I've big companies are very hard to change. The people at top will tell you, "Oh, we change, we adapt, we're nimble." And the bigger the company, as that trickles down into the front lines, it's like, we used to say at one of the big banks I worked at, getting things done around here is like changing 180-degree direction on a battleship.
Yep.
Takes a long bit of sea to come around and
Yep.
start heading in the other direction. Takes a long time. Where if I was in a speedboat, zip, man, I flip around, I'm heading in the other direction in two
Yeah.
seconds. What you're describing is not only a mindset shift, but it's a cultural shift
Yeah.
in how everybody thinks. First thing you have to do is get people to, in my humble opinion, rather than just see new tools, and we'll come back to Zenerate/Bright and bring that forward here a second. But first thing, you got to get beyond it's just a tool. It's a new tool. It's like it's like going from having somebody who manually puts the bolts on the 5 lugs of the wheel to having a robot do it.
Yep.
You don't even think about somebody touching the tire anymore. That's a hands-free job. And not that it's maybe a bad analogy, but I would think first, like people have to buy into the whole, like you have to understand the science of how people learn, and you got to buy into this data.
Yeah.
What was it? 75% of the data is lost. The curve of
Yep.
people retaining and going away. Like somebody has to first look at that thing and say, wow, this is science. Like
Yeah.
I don't need to make this up. This is neurologically proven that I'm just not going to get the impact I want with the processes I have.
I think that last statement you just made is really the key because we see a few things, right? If somebody says, I just want to add some practice to the end of my training, they will see value. They will. They'll
Yeah.
still see
Yeah.
value, but they won't see nearly the level of value that they probably wish they saw if they just did
Right.
that, right? Phase one, like level of thinking one or version one, whatever you want to call it, is I know that I need to give people more hands-on practice. It's what my people tell me all the time. Their biggest challenge is I don't get enough practice before I'm thrown
Okay.
to the wolves, right? Cool, done.
Yeah.
But to your point, then you sort of have a middle tier where you've got somebody who's like, I totally get that. And I understand how to start thinking about learning differently, where we can bring practice and chunk it out into different phases and things like that. Then you get the people who really understand the science behind it, who are like, my goal as a business is to optimize the people that support my company, who support my customers. Because at the end of the day, people don't call the CEO. They call John Smith from the call center. That's your
Yeah.
brand. That is who your brand is. And as products
Yeah.
become more and more the same, right? Everybody talks about this customer experience. There was a whole phase of customer experience in like the early 2000s to 2010s, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
customer facing, customer stuff, automation, other
Yeah.
things. And really, I think I actually saw since COVID, everybody started going, oh my gosh, my employees, that's
Yeah.
customer experience, right? They're the ones
Yeah.
delivering the experience. And that's where we've seen this huge shift in the
Right.
market to start being like, hey, this is a thing. I want to learn more about it. But once you really start understanding that, you start to change the way you don't go to your learning team and say, I need this training in 2 days and I need everybody, all 1,000 people trained by then. Well, then your training team is not going to really deliver you any sort of impact if you've given them that sort of business mindset. Your leadership team needs to understand, hey, to do it right, you can spin up things very quickly and get it out to them, but the things you're delivering to them are different. They're practice, they're coaching, they're
Yeah.
things that are going to build skill that are not necessarily the same as play a 30-second video and give them a PDF to review and then send them on their way.
Yeah.
I actually that doesn't really do the change. So there's definitely a variety of thinking where you will get value if you just want to sprinkle some practice into what you're doing. But the more
Hmm.
you understand, to your point, Vic, how this works and why this works, how you can then adjust your delivery model to capture that, you actually benefit as a business, your employees benefit, everybody wins.
We're just in different times with different technology now.
Hmm.
Maybe I'd say in the last 2+ years in a place we've never been before. And so all the ways we brought training, learnings, education to people came from things like certifications and reaching milestones that had a graduation marker on it.
Yep.
Ta-da, I'm done, right? I just went through it. My youngest daughter just graduated college,
Yep.
got her bachelor's. And we went, the gown went on. It was nice. It was a big accomplishment. I was very proud of her. And she stepped out and said, okay, now what am I going to do? Right? What goes on next? But now she needed to really learn all over again.
Yep.
Right. So,
Yep.
maybe through that process, she learned how to learn and learned a lot about her studies, a business degree. Great. And the reason I'm saying this is like, I don't want to sit here and cast stones at the way we've always done it, because I was in that and I didn't have these tools
Yeah.
that now I've
That's
become
the
very
key is
accustomed to having.
I think that's important
Right.
is it's not that anybody is maliciously or doing it. It's that we have not until recently had the capability to
Yeah.
deliver this sort of
Simulate.
way that the concept of simulation and technology that can drive practice and coaching at scale through some additional complementary tech, which I think is part of the secret sauce and the value prop of some of
Yeah.
those things. That's what really opens this up and now allows us to have the conversations like we're having now around, well, then how do you do this, right? How do you go and do it? It's one thing to know the tool. It's another thing to go, I understand how to incorporate that into my business, how to rethink the way I've delivered this, and that people that are going to do the work understand that too. That's the curve, the learning
Yeah.
curve, even of this, that needs to unfold next.
Hey, for those who are thinking like, hey, this doesn't sound really new. We've been doing this in other industries, but think about it this way. What's new is now we can do it at scale in a cost effective manner that we've never been able to do it. When we send astronauts into space, we have simulators. These things cost millions of dollars. They move, they go around, the
Yeah.
G's are pulling, right? When we certified before the gaming consoles, if you want, I had friends that became pilots, they had to go to flight school and the
Yep.
simulators were there. Now I have a friend who's a captain on a major airline. He's got stuff at his house. He said that's like on par with what he trained on. He said it's not quite yet. When he has to get certified on a new aircraft,
Yep.
he's going into the big place.
Yep.
He's got
You
to
still
go
have
through
to
the
go
whole
do it.
thing,
Yep.
and you still have to go through a process where you're not right at the helm of the. You got to get hours under you before you're
Sure.
in there. But my point is that the technology and AI and tools are bringing these things more mainstream into corporate America, where you're able to get this. We know simulations work.
Yeah,
If they didn't work, we wouldn't invest millions and millions of dollars into equipment in the airline and aeronautics and other things, because we had to. Who
that's right.
wants to blow up a multi-billion-dollar
I was just gonna
aircraft,
say it's
right?
millions of dollars versus billions of dollars, right? Which one do
Totally.
you choose?
But now with AI, and we have the ability to create simulations down to, a call center agent, or for
Yeah,
any other task or job people do in the workplace that's repetitive and or requires a learning pathway to be formed.
I think that is an interesting topic because when people think so there's sort of an evolution of thought, right? There's okay, cool, I get the concept of simulation, having conversations with AI and fake customers and that sort of thing. I get it. But but sometimes where there's a next level of creativity that really shows the power of the art of the possible. So think about these two examples. I'm a satellite dish installer. Is a computer going to tell you how to turn the wrench? No, I'm not going to
Nope.
give you a wrench through the computer. Like, right, can't do that. However, most of those of a job that is like that, right? Or a firefighter, right? These jobs, most of what that is process, knowledge, critical thinking, scenario based context and experience. The last piece of it is okay, now I have to do it, right? So imagine I'm a satellite dish installer. Well, I can still teach you all of our protocols and processes, and I can still do things like, hey, here's a picture of a satellite dish.
Yeah.
Is it installed correctly? Why or why not? So now I
Hmm.
have to go put my analytical thinking cap on and go, okay, you know what? Lug nut 5 is not in the right place. I don't know, whatever the right answer is. I'm
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
satellite dish installer. Now I have to actually do the analysis as if I was up on a roof doing that for the first time.
Yeah.
And
That's
when I do
feedback.
that 20, 30, 40 times in different scenarios, the first time I get on a roof, I haven't physically done it yet, but going way back to the first thing you said around imagery and being the same, when you
Yeah.
put yourself in the scenario to have to make the decision or do the analysis or do the thing, you still build yourself 80% of the way there. I have a conversation with
Yeah.
a local county government, and we're talking about firefighter training. They said something like it costs, I don't remember the number, it was like $100,000 every time they have to put a firefighter through a simulation, which is they run through the burning building, they light it on fire, they burn it all down, all the things, right? There's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
do 7 or 8 of those per firefighter per whatever.
Wow.
It's an
Incredible.
incredible amount of money. And that's 7 or 8 repetitions. Imagine if I was to build scenarios where they put them in those scenarios and say, all right, when this happens, what do you do? When this happens, what do you do? How do you handle this? What do you do here? What's the 3-step process you're supposed to follow? And you do that 500 times. I'm making up a number, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I do 3 simulations because at that point I've done it. I've gotten the work under me, but now I've done so much thinking work and prep work that it's like, I already know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm swinging. And all I now need to do is get used to my body doing it. Versus
Yeah.
first time you do it without that, you're thinking, you're creating your decisions, you're trying to figure out what you're doing. And that's an expensive way to go through that process. Even at something like that, you can get 80% of the way there. And there's an incredible return to whoever's paying for that training. But also that learner, right? And this firefighter, the satellite dishes, they're actually way better because they've done it so much. They have so much confidence in what they're doing because they've been given all these scenarios that they couldn't otherwise do in real life. And that's a lot of the power of simulations and examples. Completely non-contact center, right? Contact center is easy to think about, but these are just examples. Doctors and nurses talking to patients in in discussions, you know, de-escalating. we
Luke,
have we have one that's uh, suicide prevention hotline, right? People who
okay.
are feeling a certain way and they call in. That is one of the most important discussions that somebody will ever have.
Yeah.
How do you possibly prepare somebody to be able to handle that well?
Every one of them's different.
Every one of them's different. How do you train somebody to think on their feet? Give them all of the prep work that they know what, those are things where you've got banks of solutions or suggestions or
Yeah.
responses in your mind that have been ingrained in you through practice
Yeah.
that you can wield properly now. Whereas when you haven't done that, the first time you're having that call, you go, oop,
Well,
and
it's funny. I have a
it-
story for you. I have a story for you. So, um, I've done a lot of firearms training. I studied martial arts, and I've done a lot of studying about, what's the word? How would I look on it? Scenario based contact training.
Hmm.
And the very first thing that goes in a situation under duress is fine motor skills. Okay, fine motor skills. And so they say you fall to your lowest level of training, right?
Yep.
So if I'm not trained at this level, I'm gonna execute here. And I've never been in a real scenario. Okay. But and so I didn't know under stress what happened aside from falling to your fine motor skills, your motor skills going down. What happened here? 2 years ago, we had a holiday party and 50 people in the room, two tables of 25. And we've got a colleague of mine sort of sitting at the head, his wife to his right, I'm to his left, my wife is to my left. And we're having a good old time. We're chatting and the hors d'oeuvres are coming around. And my colleague starts choking on a piece of pork belly, big piece,
Hmm.
like an inch and a half by 2 inches, like a
Yeah.
half inch
Perfect for
thick.
being right in
He
the throat.
decided,
Yeah.
he decided not to cut it in half. Let's just put it that way. And and it's stuck. So he and me and his wife jump up immediately. He's a very big guy. And she tries to put her arms around him. And in fear, she looks at me and says, I can't reach. Luke, my entire universe, I
Yeah.
could have seen through a straw.
Yep. I
Okay.
believe that.
Everything narrowed. And I was like, holy shit. And the things that are going through your head, there's so much confusion going on. There's the room around you. There's the guy. I actually thought my arms are not going to be the last arms around this guy.
Yep.
That would be a tragedy.
Yep.
Right. So I got in position. My fingers could barely connect around this guy.
Yeah.
And in my head, I remembered a friend of mine telling me when he had to give the Heimlich to his grandmother at one of her birthday parties, she was stiff as a board. And he finally said, relax.
Yeah.
And she went limp. And that enabled him to give her
Yep.
the heave ho. And her piece of steak went, flying like a rocket across the
Yep.
room. And so I gave him 2 hits. I look around to the left. I look at my wife and she's like, no. And he's, drooling
Yep.
and foaming. And I get my hands underneath. And I'm telling you, Luke, I'm connected like this much. Okay.
Rock climber style. Yeah.
And I finally get it. And I yell, relax. And when I feel him limp, I give everything I have for the in and up.
Yep. Yep.
At the same time. Pop that sucker out.
That's awesome.
Pop that sucker out. And when it was all said and done, place was freaking out, guy, your husband's a hero, right? I sat there numb.
Yeah.
Okay. I like had to sit there, but first of all, there were so many great things that happened from it. Obviously for Pat, his wife was like, for every party we go to, you're sitting nowhere except next to my husband for the rest of your life.
There you go.
Thank you so much. I can't believe you did that. I'm like, no, but I was shocked with how much was going through my brain. Now that's training stressful situations. I don't know how you prepare for that. Maybe there's a way that I don't know about scientifically. I think you've got to put people in real sort of scenarios like that without harm.
You do. I mean,
I don't think we want to shove pork belly down random people's throats.
I don't think so either.
Go, Luke, go.
I think, but that's the purpose of a simulation is what can you do? Like we had an organization that was doing therapy where they would, somebody would be under under certain medicines, and then they're getting sort of therapy as it's happening. But what they would do to the providers is we would record. We actually produced a few things and put them in a scenario where it's a very real feeling. It's like a video, but it's a real life example. And then it stops you and it says, how, what do you do here? How do you do here? And you're like, right. And you go. And so you have to put somebody in the mentality. Like, even yesterday, I was coaching my 10-year-old's flag football team. And these kids were struggling with finishing their routes. They just stopped, right? How do you throw a football when you stop in the middle of a route? So I was like, okay, guys, we're going to do a go route. And there's 7 of you. I need you to catch 4 touchdowns. So catch them in route. If you catch them, I'll let you do X game. And if you don't, you're running sprints, right? That's about the
Okay.
most pressure you can put on a 10-year-old. And I had
Yeah.
somebody running behind them to give them a little shadow. So it wasn't just wide open. You were running away from somebody. And
Yeah.
it was so interesting. That's the best you do. But in that sense, it's not exactly the same, but it's as close as you can. There's something
I
on the
understand.
line. It's the last part of the game. The only way to do that is to give them some sort of incentive or something like that, right? Um, but that's the point of a simulation, is to evoke something, right? You can make simulations with conversations, be very real feeling. Um, but there's some, you do have to sort of put them in a position like that.
So here's my takeaway from everything we've talked about so far. One is what you're really describing here, whether it be the neuroscience or the behaviors, it's thousands of years old. And because training people isn't like training people to become a samurai warrior where you have them swing a sword with one strike for 15 years before they do the next one, like we don't have a lifetime to train people. We have a reasonable amount of time to bring them up, to compensate them for their job, and they get them really good at it so they can advance.
Yeah.
So that's one. Two is we know simulations work. How do we know? We have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, creating simulations for the most complex and most important things. But those technologies, up until 2.5 years ago, couldn't be brought mainstream to a corporate environment to really bring that practice to the corporate enterprise,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So we've got stuff that's thousands of years old, the science, the neuroscience of behaviors. We've got at least, my lifetime worth of simulations. So, 50, 60 plus years of simulations being created where industries have spent, exorbitant amount of money to create these things, to build people up. So we're really only advancing things we already know about. But because we didn't have those things,
Yep.
we've created all this compensating behaviors in the training and learning process because it wasn't
Yeah.
cost effective to do it.
Exactly right.
Right? Am I picking up on what you're
Yeah.
laying down?
You're spot on so far. You're spot on so
All
far.
right. So I know you can't predict the future today. I mean, I used to think everybody had I remember, my early days as a CIO, putting my 3 or 5 year plan together. And it seemed, like the thing I was supposed to do, and it was reasonable. You can't have a 3 year plan today.
It's
I
hard.
mean,
I mean, I have to
it's
forecast today.
super,
I forecasted in
it's
former
hard.
lives and different things, and it is very difficult. And there was a statistician, I don't remember who it was, but I had somebody tell me this quote one time, and I think it's so true. All models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yeah, there
Right?
you go. I
I
love
think that's
that.
fascinating.
So where do you think this training, where do you think we go in, let's call it the next 18 months. I think we could see out maybe that
Yeah.
far.
From what I've seen so far, so I'll tell you, when we started at Bright back in 2020, when I started at Bright back in 2022,
Yeah. Okay.
I would go to events and conferences, and I would, start telling people about what we're doing, and people would go, "What do you mean simulation? I
Yeah.
don't understand." And then you sort of tell them the story, and people are like, "Ah, get it." Nowadays, people, and then fast forward to 2024, people were like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of this simulation thing." But
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly what that meant. And now you have people going, "Hey, I'm looking for scenario-based simulation training, even just in a few years," right? Because as they
Yeah.
start to see it, and as the biggest companies in the world start doing it and seeing such incredible value that their case studies are everywhere, and they start hearing about it from their peers, I think that a couple things will be the case. I think that will continue, where more of the market, of the industry,
Yep.
will know that this is possible. There are still many, many people who don't have a clue that this is even a possibility. And so they're
That's for
thinking the
sure.
best thing that they need is an LMS, a learning management system, to deliver their e-learnings and their quizzes. That's the learning tech that they think they need. When in reality, that is 30 years ago, right? Or whatever, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, today.
Yeah.
Um, I think that more people will learn about it. Um, and I think that the more people who have started earlier and figured out that journey will be able to share more. There'll be more stories, more specifics, and more people will talk about it, and they'll learn from each other and from companies
Yep.
like us, who sort of share those best practices. We've done it
Hmm.
hundreds and hundreds of times now. And so we know what our our best practices typically are from what our more successful customers do. Um, so in the next 18 months, I think the market will continue to get smarter to the concept, and we'll start to figure out a little bit more about how to think about it. I think the other thing people will start to figure out is how do you train the new generations of people, right? What does
Yeah.
that even look like? What is a training a millennial versus a Gen X versus a Gen Y versus a Gen Alpha or Gen Z or whatever, right? There are very different skills, and we hear from our customers today around people who
Yep.
don't even have basic phone skills now because it's the TikTok generation and those types of
Yeah.
things. So you're
Yep.
training things you never even really thought you needed to train before. How do you do that? That's another, I think, thing we'll see people work through over the next 1 to 2 years.
There's an interesting phenomena that I live with my kids. My two oldest are were entry into the text worlds. Like my first kids' phones were little flip phones
Mm-hmm.
that they just had to make a call. So it was really before SMS was big. But my youngest went right into an iPhone as a young person. So her world is completely different. There is so much color and emotion put around text.
Mm-hmm.
And we are constantly talking about the words and texts. And she reads them back to me and we'll have a flavor on them,
Yeah, there's a
salt,
tone.
pepper,
There's a
whatever.
tone
And
for sure
it's a
on text.
tone. And I say to her, I understand why you might be thinking there's a tone there, but there's a very high likelihood there's not. I said, when you say those words the way you say them, they sound horrible.
Yeah.
But what if I say those exact same words this way?
Yep.
Do you feel offended? Do you feel attacked? Do they seem different? And I said, you can't predetermine the tone unless somebody comes out and use very explicit adjectives to describe certain things. It's hard to do that.
Yeah.
So that comes into play, right? Because if I give somebody text, then I'm going to get an emotion out of it. That's not something we've dealt with, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to tell you one last story here and then ask you some closing questions.
Yeah.
In 2011, there was this documentary out. It was called Jiro, Dreams of Sushi. Have you ever heard of it?
I have not. No.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's in Japanese and it's subtitled.
Okay.
Okay. And I must have watched it 5 times because it was the most modern take on ancient discipline that I had seen in my life.
Interesting.
And so Jiro is this lifelong sushi guy,
Mm-hmm.
okay, who brings his kids into his business, and his sushi restaurant was purposefully picked to be in the lower level of the subway system because the air is so pure and purified and the temperature and the humidity, everything is 100% constant. So the atmospheric changes, he wasn't affected by a humid day or a dry day or
Yeah.
rain or sun. He had perfect conditions. But my point in this is, and by the way, if you can rent it on Amazon or something, if for those who haven't seen it, you should go check it out, because at first my kids were appalled that I was watching it. And now it's like one of their most favorite documentaries.
That's funny.
And Jiro's still alive, by the way. But when you worked for Jiro, you may make rice for 10 years, steam rice. You're not good at it yet.
Wow.
10 years, guys steaming rice. Then they'd get moved on to the next thing. Now, we don't have 10 years in corporate America to train somebody to steam rice. So your next best bet is to get some simulations in place, because we absolutely don't have it. But that is the testament to the value of repetition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It comes from the ancient ways. So I asked you where, we started talking about, where you think it's going to go here in the next 18 months. And we didn't really, you just think wider adoptability or wider adoption rather of where we are.
I think, I definitely think, I mean, we're so early in this concept, right? Like, there are hundreds, thousands of organizations and governments and stuff out there that have not adopted this. They don't know it's a thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely think, in the next couple of years, that is a continued trend. I think also technology will make simulations that much more effective. I think the companies who figure out how to wield the underlying technology and create the best apps on top of that, right? Like think like large language models, right? Things like Gen AI has completely changed the game. So Generate's been around since before Gen AI. We have Gen
Yep.
AI versions of simulations, and we have non-version now, because Gen AI is great at some things and still isn't that good at certain things. And so we
Yep.
have this sort of secret sauce on our side. Um, but those companies that wield the LLMs and uh, package them in the most effective way will start to add more and more value. I think that's the thing we'll start to
Hmm.
see. It's easy to skin chat GPT and call it a simulator. It's not so easy to do some of
Right.
the other things that you do only when you've done it a million times and you've delivered, tens of millions of simulations and you've learned from those things. So I do think
Yeah.
that as the technology landscape evolves, simulations will become more and more robust. The analysis and coaching of those simulations will become more and more capable as things like voice analysis becomes pretty, high quality and consistently unbiased. Right now, there's still inconsistencies and challenges with some of that tech because it's trained still
Hmm.
on data sets that have biases and other things. So I think that type of tech will continue to evolve, and then those of us like Zenerate will monitor that and incorporate those as we grow too. Avatar-based simulations, video analysis,
Mm.
all those things just make simulations more lifelike, more real feeling, and that becomes more, to your point, it evokes more of a real life example or scenario.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to that journey for sure because I think we've broken the vault open of what's possible in
Yeah,
a way that we're just in the first inning on, and I'm
I agree.
excited to be a part of it. Luke, you are a unicorn in this business, and I'll tell you why. Um, I work with a lot of really cool and talented people, and I work with a lot of people who have jobs,
Yep.
right? And some people are just out there trying to earn a living and sell a product and get behind a product and create an opportunity. But very few, and this is why I say a unicorn, you might be one of three that I could even riff off a name of, who are so deeply embedded into the why and the science of why what you do is so cool and important that it's refreshing. And it's why when I met you in Sundance years ago with Bright, that I said, that's a guy I know I'm gonna be spending some time with. And I didn't know at that moment it was going to lead to this podcast, by the way, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah.
But aside from, we're in the business, we earn living by selling and people buying things, but my goal is to bring value to an organization. Like I want to walk in the door and somebody go, that guy, he turned me on to X, Y, and Z, and we got this much better because of it.
Yeah.
Um, I think you're going to be a part of that story. I know you are. We've got some good things cooking right now, and play ball. We're
Yeah.
in the
No, I mean,
first inning.
I appreciate the sentiment, and I share that last sentiment, especially you said. I mean, when I give this presentation, we just sort of touched on a little bit. When I give this at different conferences and other things, I don't ever really. I say I'm Luke. I work for Zenerate, and I don't ever talk about Zenerate maybe until the very end, just to and make
Yeah,
people know who I am. But it's all about adding value in a way that turns you on to something new that lets you gain whatever it is you're trying to gain. And in this case, there's a whole other we could probably have a whole other podcast, Vic, about the the way in which this type of skill development technology and approach can impact the world, right? Even thinking about a call, like I'll just give you a quick example just to plant the seed, 'cause I know this is
yeah, please
the
do.
kind of thing you love. Think about a
Yeah,
call center agent. Generally,
yeah,
these are frontline entry level people who are not the most highly educated necessarily, and who sometimes this is their first job, sometimes this is the job that they'll have for a long, long time. These people that are filling these super difficult and really important roles don't often have their own professional development access. They don't have access or money to buy certifications and other things. And the way that we've always trained this industry is the way we talked about before, which doesn't actually set anybody up to be successful. And both the employee in this case and the business suffer from that. But when
yeah.
we actually develop somebody's skill sets to the point where they're good at different things, we've permanently impacted that person forever. Regardless of what they do and how they
We
do, they've
certainly
now
have.
permanently impacted that. We had one of my favorite quotes we've ever had was somebody told their employer, who told us, who's our customer, I've worked at a lot of big companies and no one has ever invested in me the way that you guys just did.
Wow,
Do you think
amazing.
that person will ever leave that? Well, they will ever. Do you think that person wants to leave that company? Not for a while,
Not
at least,
anytime
right?
soon.
Somebody
Not
who's
anytime
invested in
soon.
that concept, you know, think about education, think about all of these places where that right there can go make such significant global impact. It sounds like it's pie in the sky, but it's really not. When you think of
No, it's
how
not.
many people are not supported or invested in this way. So that's a whole other podcast we can have. But
Well,
that's
I'll leave you with
what
this
drives
quote.
passion is the ability to make that kind of impact to the individual, to make it make sense for the business, and to teach people how this works so that they can then go do good in their roles and respective careers.
I will leave the audience with this quote, and I think it's apropos. Train your employees well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they'll stay.
Love that. Love that very much.
Right? It's two sides of the coin, and you've got to do both. Because think about that, boy, man. You've got people firing on all cylinders, never want to leave, and they're the best they can be.
Yep.
Amazing. Hey, I'm passionate about this topic. Thank you for spending this 90 minutes with me. Super appreciate it. And I just love the way the brain works and your sort of ability to explain these curves and things like that. And as you said, this can be a very scientific, high-end podcast. I'm not a PhD. You're much more studied in this space than I am, but I am a study of it. And I like learning the things that you have studied. So thank you for that. And have an amazing week.
Thanks, Vic. You as well. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.